Hey guys, it's Bella. Welcome back to another Mystery Monday. I hope you all had an amazing weekend, and if you're new here, welcome. We talk about true crime cases on this channel on Mondays, so if that's something that you're interested in, please come and join us. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. And the case we're going to be talking about today, guys, is wild, honestly. There are so many twists and turns in this case and so much tragedy. Honestly, this one is bizarre, so I don't want to talk about it too much. I just want to give you as much information as possible so you can form an opinion and give me your opinion, because my mind is scrambled about this case. So I really am interested to see what you guys think about this one. Before we do get into today's case, I just quickly want to thank our sponsor, Saley. You guys know I swear by Saley. I'm actually going to Turkey super soon. I'm so incredibly excited, but my plan does not cover data in Turkey. So you best believe that I'm going to be using a Saley eSIM. I cannot recommend Saley enough. Seriously, it is the easiest thing in the world. All you have to do is download the app, and then once you've downloaded the app, that's it. You never have to install a new eSIM again. All I have to do now, because I've used it so many times, is I go on there, select the plan I want for Turkey, and that's it. I'm set up. I've got data in Turkey. It is that simple. It takes seconds and it's affordable as well. Certainly more affordable than roaming costs. Traveling, it's supposed to be fun, but we all know that it can be quite a stressful thing, and that is just amplified if you get there and you can't get your data up to get the location of your hotel. You can't get your bookings up if you can't get to your next location because you can't simply get your maps up and you're trying to find a spot to get Wi-Fi from. Saley just takes all of that stress away, and they have plans for over 200 countries as well. They're compatible with iOS and with Android, and if you happen to download it, buy a plan, and find out that your device is not eSIM compatible, you can get a full refund. So if you guys ever need an eSIM, make sure you check out Saley. You can get 15% off your first purchase of a Saley eSIM data plan if you download the app and you use code BELLAFIORE at checkout. So make sure you guys check that out. I'll leave all of the information in the description down below, and let's go ahead and get into today's case. So shortly after 11 p.m. on Saturday, the 17th of September 2016, 22-year-old Nathan Carman and his mum, 54-year-old Linda Carman, packed up their boat for a night fishing trip. This is something they did together pretty often. They went fishing every 1 to 2 weeks together because it was really how they bonded. Linda didn't even really like fishing. She didn't like fish, but she loved going fishing with Nathan because it was something that he loved to do and something that really brought him joy. So by doing these fishing trips, it really brought them closer together. They weren't experienced by any means. They had taken a boating course and they had some fundamental knowledge, but they weren't skilled fishermen or anything like that. Nathan's experience was at most just a recreational fisherman, so they never really went out very far. And Linda also was always very cautious. Nathan described her as a little bit skittish when it came to fishing, so she never wanted him to go fishing alone, and he promised her that he would never go alone. She was just scared in general of like the boat breaking down, of going too far out into the open ocean, because I mean the ocean is like an unpredictable, scary place, right? So Nathan had purchased a boat just a few months prior. It was a 31-foot or 9.5 meter aluminium boat called the Chicken Pox. It had passed inspection by the Coast Guard just a month earlier, and so he was really excited to take it out fishing with his mum. Before they headed out, Linda, as she always did, sent a float plan to her friend. So basically she sent a text to her friend to let her know where they were going, the registration of the boat in case it breaks down, they can easily find them. And she says that they'll be back Sunday morning and to call in by 12 noon if she hasn't heard from her by that time. And with that, Linda and Nathan departed Rampoint Marina in Rhode Island just after 11 p.m. It's a calm night and they're only heading out 24 nautical miles to a place called Block Island, but they never made it back to shore. On Sunday afternoon, when Linda's friends still hadn't heard from her, they did exactly as she asked in her float plan, and they called the Coast Guard to alert them to the fact that they had never made it back. The Coast Guard launched a full-scale search. They deployed every available resource they had: boats, fixed-wing planes, specialized reconnaissance planes. They released a capsule to record water conditions, wind, tide, all of that sort of thing, to try and narrow down where this boat might float to if it had broken down. There was no distress call or signal that had been made from the Chicken Pox, and the emergency beacon hadn't been activated either, both of which were things that had been checked and were known to be working before they left the dock. On day 6 of the search, the Coast Guard made the really hard decision to actually call off the search. By this time, they had searched 64,000 nautical square miles from Martha's Vineyard all the way to South Rhode Island. So it was a huge, huge search, and they didn't even find a trace of the pair or their boat. They really did everything they could. So by this point, there was nothing more that they could do. Then 2 days later, so 8 days after Linda and Nathan have been missing out at sea, the Orient Lucky, a Chinese cargo ship on its way to Boston, was about 115 miles or 184 kilometers south of Martha's Vineyard when the captain actually spotted something in the water. So they get closer to this object and they realize that it's actually a life raft, and there is a man on top of the life raft waving them down. So they get closer and they throw a life ring in. He jumps off the raft, swims over to the life ring, and they pull him over to the boat and help him onto the cargo ship. They give him hot soup, water, dry clothes, and they start taking him back to shore. And of course, this man that they've just rescued is 22-year-old Nathan Carman, but it's just him. His mum is still nowhere to be found. Immediately, this is huge news, right? All of the news stations are reporting on this because it's all just so insane how this came about, right? Him and his mum went out. They've been missing at sea for 8 entire days. He has been floating on an inflatable blow-up life raft in the middle of the ocean over 100 miles or over 160 kilometers from shore for 8 days. And then this cargo ship just happens to be coming across this exact spot where he happened to float to on the blow-up life raft. I mean, it's really was a 1 in a million chance that it all lined up the way that it did. It was like finding a needle in a haystack that this cargo ship went past him. And he's also like totally fine as well. There was a tent on the raft to protect him from the sun. He had an emergency survival kit with fresh water in there and a device that would let him turn ocean water into water that was safe to drink. He had protein bars. And so when they found him, he was actually surprisingly really okay and looking really healthy. Before he's even on the shore, the Coast Guard call up, they talk to him on the phone while he's on the cargo ship just to figure out what happened to him and his mum, and also where his mum might be because she is still lost at sea.
Nathan, this is United States Coast Guard Boston. Over.
Mom and I, 2 people, myself and my mom, were fishing, and there was a funny noise in the engine compartment. I looked and saw a lot of water. The boat dropped out from under my feet. When I saw the life raft, I did not see my mom. Have you found her?
No, we haven't been able to find her yet.
So on this call, he explains that they actually went out to a place called Block Canyon, which is a lot further out than Block Island, which is where they planned to go and where Linda told her friends that they were going. Block Canyon is about another 60 miles out, and the water goes from 200 feet or 60 meters deep to over 1,000 feet or 300 meters deep. So Block Canyon is, like the name suggests, it's an underwater canyon. So it's where the ocean just drops out and just gets really, really deep. They had never gone out this far before because Linda always refused. It really freaked her out thinking of going that far out into the ocean and into water that deep, especially because they just weren't experienced enough. In fact, they had no experience offshore fishing at all. But Nathan insisted. He said it's the perfect conditions. The water is so still. It's such a calm night and the fishing is going to be a lot better out at the canyon. And so he says reluctantly his mum agreed, and at 3 a.m. they set off from Block Island out to Block Canyon, and this place is so far out that they didn't actually arrive to Block Canyon until dawn. So it took quite a while for them to even just get out there, but it was the perfect time for them to start fishing. They were set for a great day ahead and they spent the next 5 hours trolling for tuna. No life vests or anything because the water was so calm. It was so still. There were no waves, but in an instant, everything went terribly wrong. Nathan said he heard a weird noise coming from the engine compartment of the boat. So he goes to check it out. When he opens the hatch, he realizes that the engine compartment is just filling with a ton of water. And at this point, he thinks that he can fix it. So he asks his mum, Linda, to reel in the lines. And while she's doing that, he's kind of going back and forth trying to figure out what the problem is and fix it. And he's also bringing out all of the emergency safety gear to the front of the boat just in case. And he says the next thing he knew, before he even knew what was happening, the boat was sinking. It was all just happening so quickly. He throws out the life raft into the water because it's this $4,000 life raft that self-inflates as soon as it hits the water, and it has a bunch of survival gear in it like water, crackers, and other survival gear. And then he also grabs a few extra emergency items and he jumps off the boat and he swims over to the life raft. And before he knew it, the boat was just completely gone underwater. He told the Coast Guard, quote, "The boat just dropped out from under my feet." It happened so quickly that he didn't even know what was happening. He said the boat sank within minutes. So he's swimming over to this life raft. He's scrambling to get in the life raft and he's calling out to his mum. He's blowing this emergency whistle so she knows where to swim to, but she never called back and he never saw her again. She just disappeared with the boat. So when the Orient Lucky gets into Boston, Nathan is brought in for more questioning, and then his dad Clark comes and picks him up and drives him to Nathan's home in Vermont. And when he gets there is just so much press there waiting to get footage of him, trying to get an interview with him, because this is huge news. I mean, it was so miraculous that he's been out at sea floating around for 8 days and he was found like a needle in a haystack. So that Sunday night when he gets home, he gives his first sort of statement to the press.
I would just like to thank the public for their prayers and for their concern for both my mother and for myself. Emotionally, I've been through a huge amount, and my request is just to be allowed to mourn naturally.
Now, people think that his whole demeanor and his attitude and behavior when he talks to the press is really strange, and that he's really emotionless for somebody who went through such a traumatic event and whose mum is still lost at sea. But Nathan is actually on the autism spectrum, and so I think throughout this whole case, this is something that really gets misconstrued, that people maybe take his behavior, the things that he says, the way that he says them, the way that he comes across in the wrong way, and maybe they're not taking into account the fact that autism is often characterized by differences in communication, in behavior, in social interaction, and also understanding and responding to social cues with body language and facial expressions. If you know anybody with autism, or you're even just aware of autism, then you probably already know these things. But really, in this case, I feel like there is a lot that kind of gets misconstrued in Nathan's interviews because of this and because people don't understand or they don't realize. So Nathan Carman grew up in Middletown, Connecticut. He was the only child of Clark and Linda Carman, and they divorced when he was quite young. His dad wasn't super involved in his life, so he grew up mostly with his mum. By all accounts, Linda was a very giving woman. She volunteered in her community and served as an aide for other families who had children with autism. Nathan was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when he was quite young, and this isn't a term that is really used anymore. Asperger's syndrome just falls under autism spectrum disorder because the terminology is really just always changing, but he would now just be considered somebody who has a high functioning form of autism. Linda and Nathan traveled a lot together. They went to Greece, the Caribbean, they did an RV trip through Alaska, and one time while they were on a fishing trip in the Canadian wilderness, their canoe actually flipped over and they had to swim to shore. Nathan attended Middletown High School and he really didn't have any friends there. In fact, he was bullied pretty heavily by the other kids for being a loner and for being different. They would even imitate him. They would imitate the way that he spoke, he behaved, the way that he ran through the hallways from class to class. Apparently, he could be quite disruptive in high school, and he could be quite aggressive when he believed that another student or a teacher was wrong. One of his classmates said, quote, "He was very insistent that he was right and that was it. He would knock stuff over or whatever off the desk. The teacher would try to go out and talk to him, but there was no reasoning with Nathan." Another classmate said that he was, quote, "very passionate about the Second Amendment. He believed US citizens should be allowed to buy any form of weapons, including rocket launchers, automatic weapons, and grenades." All of this, of course, was really hard on Linda as a mother, and Linda's sister Charlene said, quote, "I know he led a very lonely life. You know, it's at the age where kids were being invited to birthday parties and having play dates, and nobody was calling for Nathan to go to a birthday party, and it was sad, and she hated that for her child. Any mother would hate it if her child wasn't being included in anything. It must have been really hard for Linda not to be able to fix that. Linda was a fixer. Linda had to fix things, or at least try to fix things, and she just could not fix that." And while Nathan was in high school, his relationship with his mum became really strained. They just weren't seeing eye to eye on a lot of things. There was a lot of turmoil, a lot of arguments. I mean, also he's a high school kid. What high school kid is not arguing and giving their parents a hard time? He was apparently prone to tantrums, and they actually had the police called on them at Halloween in 2009 because they had all of the kids coming to them for trick-or-treating, and Nathan would hand out bags of fish guts to these kids. The next year in 2010, Nathan insisted on moving out of the house, and so as a compromise, Linda bought an RV which she parked in the driveway of her property, and Nathan lived in there. So it was far enough away that he felt like he had that separation, but close enough that she could still keep an eye on him. Casey Sherman, an author who actually wrote a book on this case, said, quote, "Linda and Nathan had a very unique and conflicted relationship. Nathan saw his mother as somebody who was incredibly domineering, and Linda was always trying to get him the therapy that she thought he needed. And I think Nathan wanted to get as far away from his mother as possible because Nathan didn't want to feel different from anybody else." Things got really bad when Nathan was 17, when just a few weeks before Christmas of 2010, his absolute best friend in the world, his horse named Cruz, died of colic. Cruz was Nathan's absolute best friend, really his only friend in the world. His dad, Clark, said, quote, "The only friend he had was his horse. Things went downhill from that point on."
Cruz and Nathan had a very tight bond. It was definitely his best friend, his confidant. I went to the stable once with Linda and Nathan. We were ready to leave the stable. I said, "Well, where's Nathan? Go on in and get Nathan." She's like, "No, Nathan loves to spend time with Cruz alone before we leave." And he was there for probably a good half hour, if not longer, just spending time with Cruz in his stall.
He was absolutely shattered by the death of Cruz, and from that point on, he really became despondent. He stopped talking to Linda altogether and would only communicate with her through written letters. Linda said that he had what she described as a psychotic episode at school where he called the vice principal Satan and called his secretary an agent of the devil. She said that these kind of outbursts were usually reserved only for her, and she really started to worry that there was something more going on with him. So following this incident, she had him committed to a rehabilitation hospital, which only made their relationship worse. While he was in the hospital, he didn't talk to his mum at all, but he would spend hours with visits from his grandparents. When he was released from hospital, he just wouldn't talk to Linda at all. He would stay in his RV all the time. He would leave from about 8 a.m. and come back in the early afternoon, and Linda didn't know where he was going during the day because he didn't talk to her at all. She really didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to make it better. She didn't know how to go about repairing the relationship between them. And so she actually ended up calling a social services hotline, and a police officer came out to do a wellness check on him, which he really did not take well. 2 days later, he actually ran away from home. His whole family were so incredibly worried about him. They put up flyers everywhere. They put together a search team to look for him. They hired a private investigator who used dogs to track his scent. And they also had a helicopter go up to search as well. He was spotted on CCTV getting on a bus, and eventually he was found 5 days later on the 15th of August in Sussex County, Virginia, which is 600 miles or around 950 kilometers from home. He had over $4,000 in cash with him. He had 2 photos of him and Cruz, as well as a Ziploc bag with some of Cruz's hair in it. And he said that he was trying to get to a horse farm in Florida because he felt like it was the only place that he could feel normal. Nathan later said, quote, "Running away from home was something that I felt I had to do at the time. I don't fully understand or comprehend that sitting here now." Once he was found, his parents drove overnight to pick him up from Virginia and bring him home. And when he got home, he just, again, he wouldn't leave the RV. He was going through a really, really hard time. And one of their neighbors actually said, quote, "It sounded like he was taking a baseball bat to the inside of the place, just wrecking it and taking it apart limb from limb." Linda was so concerned for him and she just didn't know what to do. And she was actually getting to a point where she was becoming scared of Nathan because she was hearing all of these noises coming from inside his RV during the day, during the night. And his dad, Clark, was also becoming scared from, I guess, what Linda was telling him because he didn't live with them, but he was still involved in what was going on. And then in autumn of 2011, Linda and Clark actually had Nathan kidnapped by one of those behavioral correctional camps because they said that they were out of options. So literally in the middle of the night, these men show up, they go into Nathan's RV and they kidnap him and take him to a wilderness camp in Idaho, which is so incredibly messed up on so many levels. I mean, from the sounds of it, they just weren't handling this well at all. I mean, this is not how you treat your child. This is not how you get your child help. Obviously, we don't know the ins and outs of their relationship, but I feel like Nathan harbored a lot of his resentment towards Linda because she just was not handling this in the right way whatsoever. And she really didn't seem to know what was best for him. I mean, to have your child kidnapped in the middle of the night and taken to a wilderness camp is insane. I've seen the Netflix documentary on when parents do this. They have their kids kidnapped and sent away. To do that to any child is so messed up, but to do that to your child who is on the autism spectrum is insane. To have him ripped away from his home and put in this environment in the wilderness with all of these random people is unreal. Unreal that they thought that was the right way to go about it. And I can't even imagine how traumatic that was for him and for any child that has to go through that. When he got back a few months later, things looked like they were starting to improve for him. In January 2012, he started classes at Central Connecticut State University, and he also moved out of the RV and into his cousin's house, which probably helped a lot getting out of that environment. He also started helping his grandfather out with his business, and his grandfather even moved Nathan out into his own apartment and was paying the rent of that apartment for him. And Nathan's grandfather was a man named John Chakalos. He was Nathan's best friend, his biggest supporter. They were really, really close. John is actually very wealthy. He was a very successful man and made a lot of money developing nursing homes and extended care facilities in New England. He and his wife Rita had 4 daughters together, and he liked to take care of them because, you know, he had the means and family was the most important thing to him. His favorite motto was, quote, "Without family, you've got nothing. Family is everything." That generosity also extended to nieces, nephews, grandchildren, charity, and he was always finding ways to give back to those in his community. He had 5 sisters and 4 daughters, and Nathan was his first grandchild, and Linda was really excited to bring a boy into her dad's life, and the family said that there were no words for how excited he was. He just adored Nathan.
My grandfather was the closest person to me. He was like a father to me, and I know I was like a son to him.
From Nathan's teen years, he visited his grandfather once a week, sometimes more, and every time they were together, John would bring Nathan everywhere with him to run errands, to just introduce him to everybody around town because he wanted to show him off. He was so proud of Nathan. He also took him to business meetings. John was kind of hard of hearing, and so Nathan would come and sit in on every single business meeting, be his eyes and ears, and then he and John would consult after every single meeting. Even on 2 different occasions, John donated new fire engines to the fire department with one condition, and that condition was that the new trucks have plaques saying that the donation was made in his grandson's name. Author Casey Sherman said, quote, "John Chakalos doted on Nathan, gave him everything he wanted, whether it was a credit card or a new truck or a new apartment. There was nothing that Nathan needed because John was always there with his checkbook or his credit card to give Nathan anything he wanted." He bought Nathan a pickup truck, and he also started a joint bank account for Nathan with $400,000 in it. Then in November of 2013, the relative stability that Nathan now had in his life because of his grandparents came to an abrupt end when his grandmother Rita, who was 84 at the time, died of lung cancer. John and Rita had been married for 59 years, so he was completely devastated when this happened, and he told his friends that he just didn't want to live anymore without Rita, and he really slipped into a deep depression. And then less than a month after her death, on the 20th of December 2013, 87-year-old John Chakalos was found dead in his home in Windsor. At 8:23 a.m., his eldest daughter Elaine came to the home, where she found him dead in his bed after having been shot 3 times.
Okay, what's your emergency?
I came to check on my father to pick him up for an activity. He is in bed and someone shot him in the head.
Is he still alive?
I don't think so. I walked into the bedroom and there's blood all over the back wall.
Now, this was obviously declared a homicide, but the details of John's murder were very, very sketchy. It was determined that the killer stood at the foot of John's bed and shot him once in the stomach and twice in the head as he slept. There were no signs of forced entry into the home, and despite his huge wealth, nothing had been stolen. So he had large sums of money and valuables around the house, and nothing had been taken, nothing had been touched. There were also no spent shell casings at the scene, which meant that the murderer had taken the time to go back and pick them all up, very careful not to leave any evidence behind. It was clear that this was a personal murder and that it was premeditated. It had been planned, and the murderer was very careful to cover their steps. They had even tried to stage the scene. One of the detectives noticed that one of the glass panels from the door that led to the backyard had been smashed in, but it had actually been smashed the wrong way. So it had been smashed from the inside of the house instead of the outside. And it was clear that, the murderer had tried to make it look like a break-in, but they just hadn't done a very good job of that. Pretty quickly, Linda became a suspect because she and her dad had a pretty volatile relationship and had actually been physically violent with each other previously. Linda felt like her father was financially manipulative. One time before Nathan was born, her and her husband at the time, Clark, were living in California, and John said to them, "If you move home, I will buy you a Dunkin' Donuts franchise. I'll give you all this money." But then when they actually moved home, he kind of said, "Psych, I'm not going to do that." But he did buy them a house near him so that they would be close by. He also financially supported her, which caused a lot of tension between them because John just couldn't understand why she was always broke despite his financial support. She couldn't hold down a steady job. Her house was always in disarray, and she had a gambling problem. Even at one point, she went on a 10-day gambling trip in Mississippi. She drained one of Nathan's trust funds that John had put her in charge of, and so he had to start up a second trust fund and put one of his other daughters in charge of Nathan's trust fund because he couldn't trust Linda anymore. Nathan also caused a lot of tension in their relationship because John just wanted to do everything that he could for Nathan. He really doted on him, and Linda felt like he was trying to butt in on their relationship, on what she was trying to do with him, and how she was trying to raise him. When Nathan was committed to that rehabilitation hospital, John actually called a family meeting in the hospital waiting room, and they get into this huge argument. Linda is yelling at John that he's smothering her son, and John is yelling at Linda that she's a bad mum, that she doesn't treat Nathan like he's a normal kid and he deserves to be treated like a normal kid. Nathan's dad, Clark, is also unemployed at this time, and John offers him a job, which Clark refuses, and so in turn, he actually threatens to cut Linda and Nathan off financially. And so one thing leads to another, and things got violent. So at one point, apparently John leans across and he either pushes Linda or he pulls her hair, and Linda just starts swinging. She's scratching, she's kicking, she's punching. The orderlies, of course, are called. The police are called as well, and Linda is arrested on the spot for assault of an elderly person. Apparently, Linda told the police after this incident, quote, "My father is worth $300 million and I want my share. He's not going to cut me off. I need the money." A few months later, John requested that the charges on Linda are dropped, and Clark said that this was actually just a totally normal occurrence for them, even saying that they apparently enjoyed the animosity.
"I don't back down for my father." Yeah.
And it's just his personality not to back down.
Yeah,
Sure.
and it's not his personality back down either. So if anyone would have fought with him, it would have been me.
Anyway, so as police investigate John's murder, Linda and all of her sisters take polygraphs. They all pass, and they're all eventually ruled out as suspects, including Linda, which is when suspicions actually turn on Nathan. So as it turns out, Nathan was the last person to see his grandfather alive when they went for dinner together the night before, and he also had plans to go fishing with his mum. So they had planned to meet up at 3 a.m. halfway between Windsor and Middletown, but Nathan didn't show up. So his mum calls him 3 times and his phone, like the calls didn't go through. It seemed like his phone was switched off. Finally, he calls her back at 4:01 a.m., but detectives found CCTV footage of him leaving his apartment in his car at 2:57 a.m. And the spot that he was meeting his mum was only 20 miles away, and it didn't take an hour to drive that 20 miles. But Nathan couldn't account for that time discrepancy. He also was not very forthcoming, not very helpful with detectives when they were trying to question him, but he did point the finger at 2 people. So he said that on the night before John's murder, when they went for dinner, after dinner, they went back to John's home in Windsor, and John got a call. He could kind of overhear what was going on, and it sounded like John was talking to a mistress. When investigators look into these claims, they find CCTV footage of John at a casino with a 25-year-old woman. So she was 62 years younger than John, and they had been seeing each other for about a year. She was, however, pretty quickly dismissed as a suspect. The other person that Nathan implicated was John's bookkeeper. He was complaining that he was overworked and underpaid and just constantly complaining. When police looked into him, they found that he had stolen $400,000 from John's business, which he was later convicted for, and he did have to go to jail for that, but he was cleared as a suspect in John's murder because he was confirmed to have been out of state at the time. Which brings investigators right back to Nathan, and this is where things really get crazy. So while they didn't have any shell casings, they were able to retrieve fragments of the bullet used to kill John, and from this they were able to determine that the weapon used was a Sig Sauer 7.16 assault rifle. And following the 2012 Newtown massacre, it was actually illegal to own these types of assault weapons in Connecticut. So investigators went and they looked into 600 different gun dealers to try and locate somebody in John's life that may have purchased this very specific type of rifle. Eventually they go to a place called Shooter's Outpost, and they speak to the salesperson there who said that he had actually sold a Sig Sauer 7.16 just weeks earlier, and he remembers it because it's a very specific rifle. It's very high end. It costs like $3,000. He remembers telling the customer, or like giving the customer, other options of more affordable guns that did the same thing, but the customer was very insistent that they wanted this specific assault rifle. So he goes through all of his paperwork to try and find this sale, and when he finds the documentation, they find that the person he sold this gun to was none other than Nathan Carman. What makes this even more sketchy is that when they originally spoke to Nathan, just in the initial questioning where they were talking to all of John's family, just trying to get basic details, Nathan told them that he didn't own any weapons. He didn't own any guns. So they question him again with this new information, knowing that he purchased this gun, and Nathan's response is, "Oh, yeah, I totally forgot about that, but I lost the gun." He doesn't even know where the gun is. Never reported it stolen or anything like that, and, most people don't just lose guns. So police are thinking, how do you forget about this very expensive, very high-end assault rifle that you purchased just weeks before the murder? And then how do you lose it? Like, how do you lose a whole assault rifle? So obviously they're thinking this is really weird. When they searched his apartment 7 months after John's murder, they also found a gun locker in his bedroom closet in which he had a Remington shotgun, a pellet gun, and ammunition inside. None of these were linked to the murder though. They also found notes that had been handwritten by Nathan about sniper rifles and also about self-propelled improvised explosive devices, which I didn't even know what that was. Basically, it's like an explosive device that can move independently towards a target. Neighbors literally referred to Nathan as Murder Boy, and they also told police that he was, quote, a time bomb waiting to go off. And then to make things even worse, on the morning that John's body was discovered on the 20th of December 2013, in the early hours of the morning before Nathan went to go and meet his mum for fishing at 3 a.m., he actually destroyed his computer hard drive and his GPS system, which is not only super weird timing, but also meant that police couldn't look at his search history, they couldn't, track his whereabouts with his GPS. But while all of these things looked very suspicious, it was all circumstantial, so they couldn't actually arrest Nathan for anything anything on any of this evidence. And they also didn't have a motive. It just didn't make sense why Nathan would want to murder the one person in the world who seemed to understand him, the one person who supported him emotionally, financially, really in every way that he needed. They were best friends. They loved each other. No one ever claimed to have seen Nathan and John fighting ever since he was like 14 years old on. They were best friends. There was nothing Nathan had to gain from John's death because he doesn't get any inheritance and John is already financially supporting him totally while he was alive. And John is also a very old man. He died when he was 87 years old. So it's just very, very strange. John's case starts to go cold because they're kind of at an impasse. You know, everybody kind of believes that Nathan's involved. All of the investigators believe that Nathan is involved. They can't really do anything. They don't really have any evidence. John's family puts up a billboard offering $250,000 for any information that could lead to an arrest and conviction. Over the next 3 years, Nathan really lives in a cloud of suspicion. He feels like an outcast in the community, and so he decides to leave the state. He takes a portion of his inheritance. He inherited, I think, around $500,000, and he bought a historic farmhouse in Vermont, which he spent months renovating. He was connecting with his mom. They were going on their joint fishing trips together, and she really stood by him throughout all of the accusations. She said there was absolutely no way that he was involved in this murder. In December of 2015, he purchases his boat, the Chicken Pox, and then, of course, in 2016, he and his mum go out for that fateful trip, and Linda is never seen again. To this day, her body and that boat have never been found. So when all of this stuff that I've just told you about comes out and the public find out about it, and police sort of start connecting the dots between these two, well, the first murder and now his mum's missing, things are really not looking good for Nathan. Rumors are running wild that he murdered his grandfather and then went on to murder his mum to fast track his inheritance, because with her gone, he was set to inherit $7 million. And then as investigators from 5 different states, as well as the FBI and the Coast Guard, work together into investigating Linda's disappearance, things only look worse for Nathan. I mean, right from the start, his story didn't make a lot of sense. How does a boat sink within minutes? How does his mum, who is outside of the boat reeling in the lines, just immediately go down with this boat when the water was so calm? There's no waves, it's very still, and she just is gone in an instant. Why had no distress call been made? Why had the emergency beacon not been set off? Why was he so healthy after floating on an inflatable raft in the middle of the ocean for 8 days? And why were they out in Block Canyon in the first place? When investigators questioned Linda's friends and family, they said there was no way she would ever agree to go to Block Canyon, and in fact had refused many times before. She was cautious enough just going out to Block Island. There was no way that she was going to agree to go out another 60 miles to a place where the ocean is hundreds of meters deeper. Multiple fishermen that they spoke to said that nobody ever goes out there without an experienced captain, and even they, as an experienced fisherman, would only go out there with at least 4 other experienced fishermen. Neither Linda nor Nathan were even close to that kind of experience, and in fact, an employee at the Ram Point Marina said that he had once helped Nathan, spend an hour helping Nathan back his boat, the Chicken Pox, into its slip, and had even had to explain to him basic concepts of boat maintenance on multiple occasions. The Chicken Pox just also wasn't equipped to go deep sea fishing. It was too small, it wasn't heavy duty enough, it just wasn't a capable boat for that kind of expedition. In saying all of this though, Nathan had recently purchased tuna fishing gear, and he often spoke about how badly he wanted to go out deep sea fishing, wanted to go out tuna fishing, he wanted to go out to Block Canyon even though his mother always refused. And so maybe he really just thought that he could do it. Maybe he thought the conditions were so calm that he had looked into it enough that he could make it work. I don't know. What's also weird though is that police also got reports from multiple different people that they had seen Nathan trying to make alterations or make repairs to his boat before that fateful expedition with his mum. One man named Mike Lozzi said that he had run into Nathan hours before he and Linda left the dock, and he saw Nathan drilling 2 holes into the back of his boat. So Mike asks him what he's doing, and Nathan replied that he was taking the trim tabs off. And trim tabs are basically stabilization devices that help to lift the boat higher on the water. Mike said that he thought it was weird because there was no reason to be removing those, no reason to be drilling holes into your boat. But Nathan claimed that he didn't think that they were serving any purpose. Mike also claimed that he didn't see Nathan with any fishing poles, any fishing gear, or even any food. So Nathan admitted to removing the trim tabs and drilling these holes into the boat, but he said that he had patched them with a marine putty. And he said that when he left for this fishing trip with his mum, he was firmly of the belief that the holes were not only above water, but that they had been securely patched. Insurance attorney David Farrell said, quote, "It wouldn't work. My theory is that he was trying to make it look like he was deliberately altering the boat in a dangerous fashion. He's very calculating. He wanted people to be able to point to, oh, no wonder the boat sank." It was also said that Nathan had ample opportunity to put out a distress call or to activate the emergency beacon, and he did neither of those things. But again, he may have been so fixated on trying to fix the issue and really thinking that he could fix the issue that he didn't even think about it, that it didn't even cross his mind. It is very common for people on the autism spectrum to hyperfixate and have intense focus on tasks. So it really isn't that far-fetched to think that he just didn't think about doing those two things. And he really may have thought that he was able to fix whatever the problem was. But he did say in a later interview that he had a strong aversion to pressing a button that would result in a helicopter coming out to find them. So that is kind of odd. Now, they also had an oceanographer named Richard Limeburner to look into if it was even possible for Nathan to float in an inflatable life raft to the location where the Orient Lucky found him by chance 8 days after he disappeared. Richard said that it was physically impossible. He looked at drifting buoys, historical data, thermal images of the Gulf Stream rings, and all of these different things showed that the currents were going westward. But Nathan was actually found east of Block Canyon, where he said that the boat sank. While Nathan and Linda were still lost out of sea, they searched both of their cars, which were parked at the Marina car park. And inside Nathan's car, they found some receipts for some purchases that he had made just hours before they set out on their fishing trip. So they found receipts for a rock type anchor, which wouldn't even work for his boat, as well as some lengths of chain. And then they also found a bucket of eels in his car, which is a very common type of bait when you are going fishing for striped bass. And one fisherman said it was just kind of weird, like it didn't make sense that he would leave his bait in the car because that's kind of an important thing to have when you're going fishing, right? But again, maybe he had other types of bait on the boat with him. Maybe he didn't even realize that he had left this bucket of eels in his car. Who knows? When they go and search his house in Vermont, they find that his laptop, his computer, is missing. So whatever computer he had been using to do research online or make purchases online, it was gone. They also found a long letter, I think it was about 2 pages, which he had written to an unknown priest about his mum. This letter read in part, quote, "My mother's bullying, calling me a quitter, a stuck-up snob who thinks he's a king, and a piece of shit basically characterized my childhood. One night, though, I went to bed imagining myself as essentially a master of my own hell, joying in inflicting grave bodily suffering on other people." Eventually in 2017, Nathan agrees to sit down and do an interview with ABC News correspondent Lindsay Janis, and he really hasn't given any interviews since his rescue.
So take me through that evening. You met at the marina in Rhode Island, and then what?
We met at the marina in Rhode Island, and we had bait, which we got on board. And as we were heading out into the harbor, I had asked her a couple times in the past, will you go to the canyons with me? And she'd always been kind of reluctant about safety, and I guess she had good reason to be.
During this interview, he said that the reason he didn't set off the emergency beacon or put out a distress call is because everything happened so quickly that he didn't realize they were sinking until they sank. He also said that in his time drifting on his inflatable life raft, the seas got pretty rough, and sometimes the waves were as high as 13 feet and 4 meters high, which were just breaking on him in this life raft. And this really raised more questions for people, because when he was found by the Orient Lucky, he was totally fine. He was healthy. He was fine. And people were questioning how he wasn't in dire straits after floating on this little life raft with these huge waves breaking on him, and how his legs weren't wobbly from lack of use over the last 8 days. He ends up ending this interview pretty abruptly.
And I want to stress that It wasn't an argument, because I want to stress that it was not an argument. She had always been kind of skittish. We're stopping right here with that question.
Oh, okay.
But then he agrees to do another interview with Lindsay.
If someone said that you did not get along with your mother, that you did not like her, is there any truth to that at all?
No, there's not any truth to that. Our relationship had grown from where it had been. We did have a challenging relationship at one point in my life, but she was the closest person in the world to me after my grandfather passed.
Will you inherit all of what your mother had?
That's something that I can't comment on at this time.
He denies having any involvement with the deaths of his mother and his grandfather, but these interviews really don't go over well for Nathan, and the public really just thinks he seems even more suspicious after these interviews.
I did not cause my mother's death. We're done here this evening.
If you have nothing to hide, there shouldn't be a problem answering the questions.
And I really do think that a lot of that can be chalked up to people in the public just not realizing that he's on the autism spectrum and not realizing how that might affect him and his answers and how he responds to things and how maybe he displays his emotions. He actually later accused investigators of targeting him because he was on the spectrum and said that they made him the lowest hanging fruit. Nevertheless, people had made up their minds and rumors were running rampant about what happened. There were some people who did believe that he just didn't know what was going on, didn't know what he was doing. He just got himself into a bad situation that he wasn't experienced enough to deal with, and he didn't know where he was when the boat went down. His father, Clark, supports him 100%. And says that there's no way that he was involved, and went on to say, quote, "There's not a bone in me that thinks that Nathan could have killed his mother. Maybe he did something to the boat, but that's a mistake." Some people speculate that Nathan and Linda were in on it together and that she's out living her life in the Caribbean. The man who actually sold Nathan the tuna fishing gear says that he believes that Linda got ensnared in the fishing lines, and so when the boat went down, she was all tangled up in it and she just went down with the boat. But others, of course, think that he meticulously planned to kill his mum for the inheritance, that he sank the chicken pox on purpose and went and hid out wherever, maybe on another boat, until shortly before his rescue, which also, by the way, unbeknownst to Nathan, his mum actually explicitly left him off the will. She stated on the will explicitly that she was leaving absolutely nothing to Nathan and any of his descendants.
Hey, big guy, I guess if you're watching this, you're watching this. I want to explain why I did what I did, and why my will is stated the way it is. I feel that when you moved out, you took everything that was of value to you and everything you wanted. That's my feeling.
6 weeks after Nathan's rescue, he held a memorial service for his mum at a church in Hartford, and he invited all of her friends and family, but not very many people actually turned up, and none of her sisters attended at all because she hadn't even been declared dead yet, and they really didn't want to attend a memorial service for her when they still had no answers about what actually happened to her. They had also started to believe that Nathan was actually involved in her disappearance and in John's murder as well, and they actually filed a slayer action against Nathan in civil court, which basically prevents a person from inheriting anything from somebody that they murdered. So they didn't want him to profit off of two deaths that they believed that he caused. And they also said that if they won, they would donate all of Nathan's inheritance to charity. It really seemed at this point like they were doing this because it didn't seem like any charges would ever be brought against Nathan for these murders, and they were kind of doing it in a last-ditch effort to get more information and get the details of what really happened to their sister and their father. But at the same time, you know, families can get messy when death happens, when there's money involved, and there is a lot of money involved in this case. So I think that's definitely something to consider when you think about his family, how they're acting, and their lawsuit against Nathan. But he was also being taken to court by the boat insurance company because he had tried to make an insurance claim on the boat for $85,000. The insurance company decided not only to not pay him, but to take him to court. So they filed a suit against him, basically saying that they didn't want to pay him the insurance for the boat. They claimed that they had the distinct impression that every single thing Nathan said in his insurance claim was a lie and that there were holes in every aspect of his story. The attorney for the insurance company, David Farrell, said, quote, "I spent a lot of time with Nathan. I think he was cold, calculating, and had this whole story planned out to explain the disappearance of his mother and the sinking of the vessel." He also said that the story of Nathan floating in the ocean in that inflatable life raft for a week didn't hold water to him for even a second. Nathan didn't back down either, and he told reporters outside the courtroom, quote, "It isn't about money. It's an $85,000 claim. I almost feel like I have a responsibility to my mum to make sure that the truth comes out." So he didn't want to back down, and he wanted to go to court with the insurance company, basically to prove that he didn't purposely sink this boat. But then when Nathan is deposed for this trial, he pleads the fifth 81 times, meaning that 81 times in this deposition, he refuses to answer a question to avoid potentially incriminating himself.
How often did you lie to the Windsor Police Department?
There was one inaccurate. I'm pleading the fifth.
Pleading the fifth as to lying to the Windsor Police Department after your grandfather is dead.
That's
Is
what
that
he
correct?
said.
Okay.
Nathan's defense actually tried to blame the old owner of the boat, the guy that sold the boat to Nathan, for the issues, saying that the boat was old and faulty. But the old owner attended court and testified that it was in great condition, that a survey of the boat had proved excellent after the sale, and that Nathan had used it for many months before he had this issue, and the issue only occurred after he altered the boat. The insurance company also did tests which showed that it was likely that the marine putty he used to fill the holes had failed, and that the boat had slowly been taking on water for hours before Nathan noticed it. So the judge ends up dismissing the lawsuit that was brought on Nathan by his aunts, the Slayer action. But in the case against the insurance company, the judge rules that it was in fact Nathan's negligence that caused the boat to sink. Not that it was intentional, but just that it was his fault. And so this civil case was really the catalyst for a criminal case, because now it has been ruled in a court of law that he was responsible for the boat sinking, which in turn caused the death of his mum. It's still a very hard case to try because there's no body, there's no boat, there's no real evidence that they have against him. But after several years, Nathan is actually arrested and charged with the murder of his mother, Linda Carman. He was charged with murder on the high seas. His indictment stated that he, quote, "devised a scheme to defraud his grandfather's estate and obtain money from the trust, and the murders were part of this scheme." Nathan hired defense attorney Marty Manella, who had been a litigator for a very long time and was known for being a bit of a bulldog. And he and Nathan ended up becoming very, very close. It was almost like a father-son relationship. Marty said, quote, "He had literally no support. That was probably the hardest thing that Nathan had to endure, the fact that he had no one. But he had us. He really had us. And I had never in 50 years of practicing law had that kind of relationship with a client. Never." Nathan pled not guilty in court, and during his detention hearing, his aunts wrote a letter basically saying that if he was released on bail, they would fear for their lives. And his attorney Marty said, quote, "For years, Nathan has lived in solitude in Vermont. He's never threatened anyone, so to me, it was unusual that they were in fear of what?" But the court did decide to go ahead and deny Nathan bail, and the trial was set to begin on the 2nd of October, 2023. Nathan was incredibly active in his defense. Every moment that he wasn't in his cell, he was in the prison library, reading up on law books, and Marty said, quote, "This case was his whole life. He wanted his day in court. He wanted to clear his name." And then tragically, on the 15th of June 2023, Nathan ended his own life in his prison cell while awaiting trial for his mother's murder. Despite the family feuds, all of his aunts attended his funeral to pay their respects. His attorney, Marty, not only paid for the funeral and for his cremation, but he also delivered the eulogy as well. He said in part, quote, "Nathan was an intelligent, sensitive, caring, non-violent, and loving young man. Sleep with the angels, my dear friend." He also later told reporters, quote, "It was probably the toughest thing I ever did because it was like losing a family member. May sound crazy. You lose cases, you lose clients, but you don't have that kind of contact that we had with this person." The criminal charges against him for the murder of his mother, Linda Carman, have been dropped, so he remains an innocent man still today. He was never and has never been charged with the murder of his grandfather, John Chakalos, but the case still remains active. Months after Nathan's funeral, a judge in Connecticut officially declared his mother, Linda Carman, dead 7 years after she disappeared at sea. Now, before we wrap this up, I just want to give a little bit of extra insight into the case as well. Author Casey Sherman, who wrote a book on this case, said that during his investigation for his book, he actually unearthed evidence that directly contradict what the police allege about John Chakalos' murder. Namely, he found that there was actually a neighbor of John's that said that he heard gunshots coming from John's home at around 2 a.m., which is a full hour before Nathan is seen on CCTV footage leaving his home to go and meet his mum to go fishing. He also said that apparently associates of the family also pointed fingers at other members of the Chakalos family. And he also said that he believes if this case would have gone to trial, that prosecutors wouldn't have been able to secure a conviction against Nathan. He said, quote, "Why would Nathan decide to shoot his grandfather in cold blood in his bedroom? He was already destined to get the money." I mean, it truly makes no sense, right? What did he have to gain from this murder? John was 87 years old. He was also already paying for everything in Nathan's life. He had a joint bank account with him with $400,000 in it. He was paying for his apartment that he was living in. He just didn't have anything to gain and kind of had everything to lose. He loses the financial support of his grandfather. He loses his best friend, his confidant, the one person in the world that truly supports him and seems to understand him. It just really doesn't make any sense. Like, it makes no sense at all, but the gun is really hard to look past. Like, there are definitely some very weird, very suspicious things that don't look good for Nathan, but at the same time, he really could have lost the gun. Maybe he didn't lose the gun. Maybe someone from his family took the gun and used it and was trying to frame him. I mean, maybe that's an outlandish theory, but people do crazy things for money. But then also, this is what I mean, like every time I lean one side, I think about something else that pulls me back to the other side. Like, for example, the fact that the morning of John's murder, he destroyed his computer hard drives and his GPS. I mean, that is so suspicious. That just seems like way too much of a coincidence. And families really go crazy when money is involved as well, especially when it's that much money. Casey Sherman also said, quote, "To get away with one murder is nearly impossible. To get away with two, it's giving Nathan too much credit. He tried to remodel his house in Vernon. He watched YouTube videos and he thought he could take his farmhouse and rebuild it, but it just ended up a big pile of Jenga blocks." He also said, quote, "If he murdered his mother, why would he file an $85,000 insurance claim knowing that he would be exposed to further investigation?" And you know, Nathan, he wasn't an experienced fisherman. He was just a guy who loved fishing, who had just bought his boat and he was excited about it. So he may have been led astray by watching a YouTube video or looking something up, and that kind of led him to believe that he should remove these rudders. Maybe he had in his mind that he wanted to take his mum out to Block Canyon and he had read something online that made him think, oh, I should remove these rudders and put these holes in and putty them up. Maybe he really didn't know what he was doing when he put these holes in the boat. I mean, he openly admits to putting the holes in the boat, you know? And what also gets me is, why would he choose this plan to murder his mum? Like, he loses his boat that he spent all this money on, and he risks his own life just to murder his mum. He has to go floating in this inflatable life raft in the open ocean for 8 days, hoping that somebody would find him. Why would he purposely put holes in a boat that he knew was going to cause the boat to sink if he was also on this boat that was going to sink? I mean, it really seems like there would have been simpler options to kill his mum, right? There are no oceans that far out that he could drift to. There was no guarantee that the Orient Lucky was going to come across the exact place that he had drifted to. And he was this tiny little dot in the middle of the open ocean. I mean, again, this is what I mean that I keep like going one way and another, because first of all, he had bought a $4,000 life raft, which is kind of crazy. But I guess it's also not crazy if you plan on going deep sea fishing. But then also he drifted the complete opposite way than the currents were going, and he was totally healthy and fine and like totally just okay when the Orient Lucky found him. His legs weren't wobbly after, 8 days of not being able to use them. I mean, it's very weird. But also maybe he didn't know where the boat sank. Maybe he wasn't actually at Block Canyon and he didn't know that. Some people speculate that he killed his mum on the boat, went and hid with the boat somewhere along the shore, and then returned back out to the sea to sink the boat when he knew that that freighter was coming along and they would find him. And then some people also speculate that he didn't plan to kill his mum, that maybe he killed his mum in a fit of rage. Maybe she didn't want to go out to the canyon with him and so he just got really angry and murdered her. Or some say that maybe he even blamed his mum for the murder of his grandfather. I mean, I do keep coming back to the fact that there is just so much circumstantial evidence. Like the fact that he destroyed his computer hard drive and his GPS the morning his grandfather was murdered, and he just weeks before the murder had purchased this very specific assault rifle that was used to kill John, is kind of crazy. And then he conveniently loses this gun, no report that it's been stolen or it's missing or anything, and he didn't tell the police about it. And he was also the last one to see him as well. He had dinner with him. So who's to say he didn't murder him after dinner and then he went home, fell asleep, because he says he slept through going to meet his mum and that's why he was late. It's just not a good look. And then he was also the last one to see his mum. Like, it seems like a massive coincidence if he wasn't involved in both of them, but he's like weirdly the last one to see either of them alive. I don't know, there is just kind of too many coincidences in the case, right? I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know all of your thoughts, because this one has my head spinning. Like, my head is all over the place because every time I think of something contradicting, and I do feel like maybe I lean more towards him having involvement because there's just too many coincidences for them to be coincidences. And there's no evidence that anybody else murdered either of them. I mean, nobody else could have murdered Linda, right? So if that was a freak accident, then the fact that his grandfather was murdered with all of these weird coincidences surrounding him just 3 years earlier is very, very strange. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Let me know your thoughts, but that's everything for this case. That's all from me today, guys. I look forward to hearing what you think. I look forward to chatting with you in the comments about this one, because it's probably one of the most bizarre and just most mind-boggling cases I've done. But yeah, that's all from me today, guys. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and hopefully I'll see you in my next video. Bye, guys.